Hello and welcome to Hudson Valley News and Views. I'm County Legislator Catherine Borgia, and I have a very special guest with me today, Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff, here to talk about the Albany update, what's going on upstate, and how it's going to impact us down here in Westchester County. Thank you so much for being here, Sandy.
Thank you. It's great to be here, too.
Yeah, it's sort of turnabout as fair play because I've been on your show so many times, and finally I have you on my show.
That's great. Well, it just shows how government works together on different levels, too. We have all these issues that we really work together on.
Yeah, and it makes sense for the people, for us to do that, to coordinate our efforts. Sandy, first of all, thank you so much for all that you do for the people of your legislative district, which coincides with the county legislative district. And I just want to mention that, we're right now in the middle of the legislative session. I thought maybe you'd like to start out by just giving us some of the priorities for this year in Albany.
Well, we start out at the beginning of January, and between January and the end of March, we're really talking about budget.
Yeah.
I mean, I may have a lot of other priorities on legislation, but that will come later on.
Right.
But the issue is we've gone through very difficult times in Albany, as you have in the county, as people have privately gone through with economic difficulties. And so we've gone from having about a $10 billion budget deficit in the last number of years to a proposed $2 billion surplus over the next few years. So, at least we can see some of the light at the end of the tunnel. And so as we look at the budget and we deal with the public, we've had a lot of public hearings and town meetings and so on to get input from people, we're able to not dig in so deeply and make these major cuts that we've been doing for a while. So, and there's so much focus right now in Albany on education, not just the budget, but just, where we're going in our educational field. And it's very exciting times and very difficult times for many parents, teachers, and those people that sit on the outside and say, what is this Common Core? And I must say, as a former teacher, I'm really getting quite involved in that aspect as well.
Well, tell us a little bit about your feelings about Common Core. I know we've heard sort of both sides of the issue, although I have to personally say that I think raising the standards is generally a good idea. Maybe there's a few little bumps in the road with the execution of it, but in general, the goals of raising the Common Core seem, to me at least, to be very admirable.
They really are. We spent a day, I went with Senator George Latimer to the Austin schools a couple weeks ago, and we really spent a whole morning going in and out of classrooms, about 10 classrooms. It was very interesting because they were all so different and made up of all kinds of different kids, different ages, dealing with different topics. And then we met with the teachers and principals to talk about what we'd seen with Common Core. And I think the thread of it was that there was a lot of support for these higher standards. And Common Core is about standards and it's about curriculum. And I think where we get into the people having more disagreement is about the curriculum. Is it too much standardization? Is it rushing things too much for kids? When you're starting a new program, it's always hard because, it'd be great if you could start with kindergarten and then the next year it's kindergarten and first grade and then second grade. But we really want to get to the kids today. We don't want them to be left out of really pushing themselves, trying to learn more, and have a better understanding of what they're learning. So I think that's true. I think basically standards are really good. Let's do some tweaking with the curriculum. The Board of Regents has already decided to slow it down, slow the process down of evaluation.
For the implementation.
And so, I think that's good. There's that other issue too about having data up on up in the internet, and this cloud above us, data about students, and a whole issue about should we have students' information available for the world to see? I think that's an issue that we have with everything right now.
Absolutely. I mean, our walls of privacy have really eroded, and part of it is our own habits.
Right.
That we are very public with a lot of our information. So even though there's privacy and sensitivity to that, there's also value in aggregating data. Maybe it's something to do with less people's individual names, but being able to track. I mean, that's part of accountability too,
Absolutely.
right? Being able to track exactly what's working, and frankly, what's not working, so that you can
It may be
it.
understanding at a certain level, maybe in third grade. The kids are just not understanding, and maybe that's the pattern
Right.
in the classroom. So if you had that data before you to say, look, I'm not reaching 70% of my kids.
Right.
So what am I going to do to change
Right.
that? And as a
Right.
teacher, you say, because you know there are different ways to teach, and then you might have to have more individualization. You may
Right.
call in for some additional resources if the schools have them to help the kids with that particular problem, or math. I mean, they have this new math. I have to tell you, a long time ago, I taught the new math that went out.
Yeah, there's a Tom Lehrer song about that, right?
I actually played that in my classroom to parents because they had no idea what the new math was. So I kind of laugh now because parents say, we have no idea how to help our kids with their math homework, and it's true. But it is more about understanding the math versus just memorizing the math.
Right.
So, or just getting out a calculator, but really understanding it so that at the end of the day, that you're better off in the math world, and math and science is going to lead our country to a better standing if we can move ourselves up that
there's
way.
so many things that are in the forefront right now in our social and political discussions about, how do we maintain the advantages that we have as a nation, and it's got to be through increased education. It addresses so many issues that are before us, including retaining our competitive edge, being a place where innovation still flourishes. But it also has to do with income inequality. It has to do with giving all of our students a chance to succeed. There's a huge amount of human capital that we can't afford to lose. We really do have to capture it in the very young ages. I remember years ago, I was actually in the Children's Museum with my children in Manhattan, and I was reading an article in a paper, in a newspaper, when they were playing on something about the difference between children who enter pre-K or kindergarten with, say, 1,200 words versus the difference of children who enter a 4-year-old or 5-year-old program with 5,000 or 6,000 words, and how at that young age, at 4 years old or 5 years old, it's a huge difference. And not only that, it's almost unbridgeable.
Right.
So the person who has 3 times as many words going in is just at such a huge advantage educationally throughout their education, but yet anyone can teach their children more words. I mean, everybody speaks.
People need to sit down and have conversations with their family, maybe eat dinner and
talk
and read a book and have your child just sit there on the lap and read a book, whether they're reading or not. Just
and even things
that.
like counting as you walk up the stairs, things that some people just do because that's their family's way, but that's a teachable skill.
Right.
So, I think it's the whole child experience, and we really do need to focus on that. So I don't know. I think, as you say, implementation sometimes is the tricky thing. It's
the hard part. It's change. It's change with anything. And of course, pre-kindergarten now is the top of everybody's agenda, and it goes back to what you say. The sooner that you can educate children and get them on an equitable level, so that when they start out in kindergarten, they've got a chance to do as well as their neighbor and their friends.
Well, some of it too is just what we understand now about the brain, right? Things that we didn't know 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or when I was in pre-K or when you were in or kindergarten, whatever. So that's interesting. So that's certainly a big topic on people's minds. And you mentioned the budget. So the governor had some interesting proposals in his State of the State and in his budget presentation.
A lot of change.
A lot of change.
And antennas going up.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us a little bit about what the proposals are.
The whole thrust of it, we've been working for a while on trying to cut back the costs of doing business here in the state on all levels. And in our state budget, we've actually, even though we don't have a 2% cap, we've stayed within that in our state spending. And we really made an effort to do that. And it's hard to do because there are always programs that come along that you'd really like to fund. So in continuing with the cap that we do have in place with our governments as well as our school districts, that will continue, and that's a 2% cap. But what the governor is recommending this year is if a government, county or village or town, stay within their 2% cap, that the state will come in and pick up the difference from the year before and that 2%. Or it may be 1.6. It depends. It plays out differently in each community. And if they stay within that, the state will come in actually, and it's either going to be sending a check to the resident, or it's going to be an income tax credit, depending on which year it is.
Right.
And the same thing with schools. If the schools will stay within the 2% cap or thereabouts, whatever they're allotted, that the state will come in and pick up the difference between last year's funding and this year's. And then the governor is suggesting with the schools and government, the second year of this program be another freeze, and the state would come in and pick up the difference. But each entity, whether it's a school or a locality, has to determine ways that they can save money through sharing of services, consolidation, elimination, whatever, and to show savings of, I think the way the legislation will probably work, although we haven't voted on it yet, would be at least a 1% cut for the next couple of years in the budgeting. So the whole thrust of it is to try to keep lowering our tax burden, because when you compare us with other states, we're either at the top or number one or number two with New Jersey. Sometimes we go back and forth with New Jersey. But, that's not a place that we want to be. And it makes a difference for our residents, our businesses, and recruiting other people to come here to our state. So that's the thrust. And it's really hard because, you did a lot of work on consolidation and sharing when you were town supervisor in Austin. And I think about how difficult it was.
Very difficult.
And you had the police department, no longer a town police department, going with the county to save tax dollars, as well as the court system, combining the village and town courts, all really good moves. But it was a real challenge to do that.
What I find interesting about the governor's proposal, even though there are, again, the devil's in the details and the implementation could be somewhat complex, certainly. We could talk a little bit about that later. But what I like about it is that I do think it incents that type of behavior, because one of the challenges that I face at the local government level with any kind of sharing of services or consolidation, not only the big consolidations like the police department and the courts, but really any kind of sharing of services, is that residents, people, feel apprehensive about it.
Right, absolutely.
And so that you have even though people want to see their taxes reduced and sort of intellectually, theoretically think it's good to merge services, they have a real human worry that somehow this is going to result in reduced services or reduced quality of life for them. And honestly, it's a very understandable concern, because when you're entering into the unknown, you don't know how it's going to play out. And one of the things, particularly with the police department, because of course health, safety, and welfare is the most significant thing that governments provide, we really had to talk it through about what was the sort of user interface from the average resident. How was that going to change? So, I can see both sides of that coin. I guess the other thing, though,
but there were very large savings when you did that.
Oh,
for
tremendous
the town of Austin.
savings! Tremendous
Very
savings.
large savings.
People got basically. I mean, we saved $1 million on our $14 million budget, which was huge, and people on average saw like the lowest was about a 7% tax reduction in their tax bill, and the highest was about 12-13%. So depending on where people lived, but it really was a big savings. But of course, in terms of dollar amounts, there's always things continue to cost more, and there's always going to be. That's kind of like, what have you done for me lately? So you do have to think about what are some of the other things that you can do, and that's one of the reasons why I do like the proposal, because I think it forces people to it forces governments to look at things, and it also kind of takes away some of that burden of people's anxiety, because people will want their governments to engage in this so that they are eligible.
So they're eligible for a freeze.
For the freeze.
And on top of that, too, Catherine, if you're in a community that has a freeze, or getting paid for the freeze because you've stayed within a cap, that you will then qualify for a circuit breaker, which is another component part of it. And only communities that stay within that cap system, which, maybe that's fair, maybe it isn't fair. But I've been working on the circuit breaker for a long time, and it kind of came back in this form. And, it's most likely going to deal with properties or people that have an adjusted household income of $200,000 or less. That may be how it turns out at the end of the day. But
describe the circuit breaker.
What it does is it looks at your total household income, all your taxes for your schools, your villages, your towns, your county. and it looks at your the taxes that you pay, looks at your income. And if you pay a certain percentage of your income for your taxes, I don't know how it will end up, but maybe 6% or 7%. So if you add up all your, your taxes that you pay, you add up all your income, and if you pay, a certain percentage,
Right.
then you're going to get a deduction. You're going to get a tax credit, income tax credit.
Yeah.
And so that when you fill out your form, if
Right.
it goes through this year, it will apply to, it will actually apply to this year's taxes, but you don't do your income tax until the next year,
Following year,
2015.
yeah.
So you won't get it back for a while. But it's he's put in these proposals,
Yeah.
that are really incentives
Right.
for us to really look at how to do
Yeah.
things differently, and also to get the community, as
Behind
you
it.
say, behind it, because
Right.
if they realize that they're going to get these savings, if I would go to my village board, I would go to my town board, I start to talk about these things
Yeah.
in schools,
Yeah.
and so on, and say,
Yeah.
this is something that I think would really be good for us.
Well, I think it's sort of a double-edged sword. I think all of us in government have the intention to provide very good services, and it's easiest to provide good services if you have the resources to do it. But on the other hand, too, that's almost the more compelling reason for why you want to do everything as efficiently as possible, so that you do have the resources for good programs,
other
as you
things.
mentioned, and also, frankly, to assist our citizens who are in need. The government can't solve every problem, of course, but you can make life easier for people.
Well, the circuit breaker
Right.
does that because it's really targeting, I would say, definitely targets senior citizens who have less income, but in houses that have higher taxes
Right.
that they've lived in for a long time. It targets the person that has lost their job. And so, yes, they have a house and they have a mortgage,
Right.
but they don't have a job to be able to pay for
Right,
it.
right.
And it's during that period of time that would help. It also helps middle income, whatever we consider middle income. It's a kind of like a rotating thing.
Right. Well, different in different parts of the
Different
state,
parts,
certainly.
right? Yeah. So it helps people in that way too. So
Yeah.
I think it really it's a targeted program, and I think it's
Yeah,
good. Some
yeah.
people have come to Albany and said it should be even more targeted than what we have. So at the end of the day, it's a program that may start one way and then the next year,
Yeah.
have some different parameters to it. Now the STAR program continues, and
Right.
people always get nervous about
Right,
that.
right.
We're still continuing the school property tax relief program. Yes,
Well,
we
that's
are.
important for our part of the world, that's for sure.
So that's the discount that you get
Yeah.
from the state to pay for some of your school taxes.
Let
and
me
it's
ask you a question
significant.
about that, because people did have to re-register for the STAR program
Yes.
last year. If people did miss that deadline, can they register now for the next year?
They can
Yeah.
register. They can get up on the website,
Right.
the tax and finance website, and register. If they get to be too late, they may have to appeal to our tax department to be able to register.
Okay.
And so we're trying to get everybody back in
Yeah.
that was there.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some people just, I don't know, they don't hear about it, or
They didn't
don't
hear about it.
They don't
Yeah.
think
I mean,
that
I think
they need
every
to do
level
it.
of government really tried to. Right.
Absolutely.
Maybe they don't think they have to do it. That's exactly right. That's exactly
And there
right.
could be some people that were getting the exemption that shouldn't, because they may have had a second home, or it could be that they've turned their ownership over to their children,
Okay.
and so they don't own their home anymore.
Right, but-
You have to be the prime. That has to
Oh,
be
I
your
see.
prime
Because-
residency,
right,
and you have
right,
to
right,
own
right,
it.
Right. So, and the children
So,
presumably own
they're in
homes of
another
their
place.
own, or I
They're in
gotcha.
another
Yeah,
place.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
they have
yeah.
to live in the place.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So,
absolutely.
and then
That's
some people,
only right.
it's happened, and so some
Yeah.
people may be squeezed out of it because of that. But no, if anybody has a problem listening to the
Right.
program, they can call me, and
Right.
just we'll make sure that.
Well,
they
I
get
did.
in
I
it.
re-registered on the website, and I have to say
Right.
it was as easy as could be. I mean,
Absolutely.
it was very simple. It took 2 minutes.
Right, right,
So
right. Because they kept saying, actually, Catherine, they sent out. I think from our tax department sent out 3 different notices
Yeah.
to people.
Yeah.
They kept, getting down to fewer and fewer, and then December. The end of December was the cutoff, but they've extended a little bit. I mean, you always have to tell people this cutoff. If you don't, you won't hear from a lot of people. So, but I'm sure we can get people back into
okay,
it.
good. That's good news. Yeah. So let's go back to talking about the governor's proposal. So one of the things that you have championed and I think is a good thing for us to do, and I am sort of recommending that Westchester County also champions this because of work that has happened in Westchester County, is this idea for the second year where you have to make progress towards sharing services and consolidation, that we do credit municipalities that have done that already.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's something that I've talked to the governor's people about, the assembly, I've talked to senators, and we do have to have a credit, because there were a lot of people like you
Right.
in the town of Austin that went out when the governor was Attorney General. That's when it all started.
Yeah.
And we went out and said, people do this, save money, consolidate,
Right,
share,
right.
and there weren't a lot of people that did that.
Well,
So
there were a lot of people who took advantage of the Department of State grants,
grants.
and their expertise,
Right.
and went out and tried to do it. But
Right.
For those of us who sort of managed to overcome all the hurdles, it is true. You don't want to disincent the fact
Right.
that people have already moved
right,
forward.
because you've already saved a lot of money
Right.
in the policing.
And that goes on. It continues to go on, even though you don't see further reductions. If we hadn't done it, the tax increases would have been higher
Right.
every year. So
Right.
that's the that's the way you have to look at it. I mean, I know, for example, Supervisor Puglisi in Cortland, she has had 12 years now of having this, or 13 perhaps this year, and so she has saved the equivalent of $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.4 million every year, because
I think she'll just be able to buy into this program
absolutely
without
right.
doing anything else.
She's an
probably.
inspiration to a lot of us, because she has a lot of creative ways of cost cutting while still providing all the services that are needed. So yeah, we do have to have we do have to encourage the governor and his administration to figure out ways to do those levels of credit. And then the other thing that that the Association of Counties, your former stomping grounds, which now I'm on the legislation committee there, has looked at is what's going to be the role of counties in this. We know that there's some discussion about being
Right.
the implementation.
Well, the way I understand it at the moment, but things are very fluid right now,
Right.
is that it would be the largest government or the largest school district. So if you looked at government, it would be the county that would be the lead. If the county, my understanding is the county was not going to be engaged, then it would be the community that's then the largest, which would be Yonkers.
Right.
And then you keep ratcheting down. It's not. They're really trying to have the largest level of government organize the
Right.
activities.
So as a monitoring function to make sure that
I'm not sure, Kathy, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
so. Monitoring as well as proposals.
yeah.
And I think
yeah.
the county is the greatest place for trying to develop some proposals.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you look at from a regional level, that does make a tremendous amount of sense. And one of the things I think we can do as counties in New York State is really take the leadership role in providing opportunities for sharing of services. I mean, this is something you've talked about for many, many, many years. But, can we do back office services? Can we do things like make opportunities to do collective bargaining in municipalities through one organization, all sorts of things that are individual, localized costs, but that also have an impact on what happens in neighboring municipalities. So, for example, every time you negotiate a police contract or a CSEA contract, of course, they're going to look at what has happened to all the municipalities around you. So that just has a natural tendency to drive up.
Everything up.
Yeah, drive upwards. And that's not wrong. That's what they should be doing. They're a collective bargaining unit for their members. But for municipalities, it puts you in a difficult spot, because you're competing against each other, whereas the possibility might be better to join together,
right.
to join together. And not that, I mean, obviously we want the people who work in municipalities. I mean, we were just talking about how this winter has been very, very difficult. For goodness sakes, those people work so hard and are so dedicated and deserve to make what they make, and to get all of the because they really do put their heart and soul into serving the people of their municipalities. But on the other hand, too, every little municipality in Westchester has, multiple contracts, and it would be good to at least have a clearinghouse for banding resources together
Right.
on how to do
Well,
that.
multiples of, equipment and things
Yeah.
like that with sharing. I mean, some
Oh,
communities
absolutely.
have done that, or they've shared also
Yeah.
with their school districts within their
Yeah.
communities,
Yeah.
which is very helpful. I don't know what we would have done about salt this winter,
Yeah.
whether there was, maybe, I think we'll have to go back and look at it and see if
Right.
there's a more organized way
Right.
to
Well,
get the
I think
salt in.
a lot of municipalities probably did have some. So far, I know in New Jersey they're having some problems, but I don't think we're really having the level of difficulty. But for example, that's a perfect thing.
Couple more storms.
Couple more storms. Oh,
don't
God
know.
forbid. Go spring.
Sorry, every time a storm comes, I think about all the overtime and all the salt on the roads. And
Yeah, and salt on the roads is actually an issue. This is digressing a little bit, but there are some environmental impacts
Right,
to these heavy
absolutely.
winters, and we do have to think about those. And that's another thing that comes down from the federal government to the state government to the local municipalities. But that's another example of how it's very difficult for a small local municipality to comply with all of the MS4 stormwater regulations. They're excellent regulations, but that's another area where it would really be good to have a centralized level of expertise that could help you with all the MS4 compliance issues that happen in your small municipality. So
Right.
there's a lot
Well,
of
it could be
ways that counties
even
could.
the grants
Yeah.
for, on a countywide level to be able to help all the localities
Yeah.
access state grants
Yeah.
to look at other sharing possibilities is also, because
Yeah.
not everybody has the
Right.
expertise in grant writing.
Right. I mean,
either.
that's something that was included in the Westchester 2025 that talked about how the planning department could act as sort of a brain trust for a lot of those things. And the Westchester County Planning Department, as you know, is pretty. Has a great deal of expertise, even though there's been some reductions in staff, but they do have a great deal of expertise in all these things. So it's an opportunity. It is an
Right.
opportunity for.
And the public needs to join us
Yes.
in their creative ideas. It's so
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
we need the public to think about that, how we can create those savings.
Yeah, absolutely, and and that's I'm glad you mentioned that, because sometimes there are things that you can crib from other areas, other types of businesses, other types of organizations that government can use. I mean, I think in government, although there's so many good things that happen as a result of government, sometimes we can get a little set in our ways.
Absolutely.
So this is an opportunity to get unstuck.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We could go into the very critical one of how we pick up our garbage and recycling and how many
Yeah.
days, and are we willing to
Yeah.
forego one day, and what are we
Yeah.
willing to do to
Right.
save some money?
Well, I mean, we've increased the recycling capacity at the county level, but it still is a requirement to how do municipalities actually pick that up? How do they actually sort? How do they actually get the credits for for that? How do we train ourselves in our
Right.
families to behave differently? How do we train ourselves to reduce our level of garbage? Like, what are some of the
Right.
decisions you can make at a personal level that that reduce the load on your on your municipality and on the earth?
Right, right.
So so it's a very interesting thing. It really it's not just something that happens from the top down. It also has to happen from the bottom up. That's the trick.
Absolutely,
That's the trick.
absolutely.
Well, let's talk about some of your other legislation after the budget passes, hopefully by April 1st.
Right,
Keep your streak going.
4 years of on-time budgets, which would really be great. So, one of the areas that I've been working on, I've been involved with the health issues for children for a long time. Looking at nutrition and looking at the smoking issues, particularly, and so we got a bill passed this last year, and you were very helpful. A lot of people were very helpful to not have smoking in children's playgrounds, so that we could set the tone and not let children see people smoking where they're playing.
Right.
And so a new thing has come along. It's called the e-cigarette. I don't know how new it is, but it hasn't been around all that long. And there's always something new.
Right.
And this e-cigarette is starting to work into the workplace, movie theaters, different places where we have laws that say you can't smoke. and it really looks like, I mean, it looks like a cigarette. It is the form of smoking.
Right.
It's not the same. The federal government has not taken a position on it yet, whether it's good or bad that I know of.
Right.
But what I'm trying to do is to say that if we have bans for smoking in the workplace, in our restaurants, in our bars, on the Metro North Railroad stations, in parks, in school dorms, hospitals, I think, have done it themselves. If we have regulations that say you can't smoke, then you just can't smoke e-cigarettes in those places. We're not saying you can't smoke e-cigarettes, or I'm not saying that, just that wherever we have laws that ban smoking,
They should be consistent.
they should be consistent.
Yeah.
And because people don't actually know, really, unless you sometimes get close to find out what somebody is smoking. I mean, I could sit here on the set and have an e-cigarette. It would look very strange. And what's happening is, I understand two perspectives. One is that people are using it to remove their habit of smoking. And that's fine, and they can still do that. It's just that they can't do it where you can't, where we have bans on smoking. But it's the young kids that are now picking it up. And they're flavored type of e-cigarettes. And so what they're doing, there have been some articles recently that they take them out in school. And they're in the classroom. They start, because they think it's cool and funny with their teachers, I guess, and start to smoke. And there really isn't anything that says they can't do it.
Right.
So I believe that in New York State we have to have a law and be consistent. Now, New York City did pass legislation that precluded e-cigarettes. Wherever you can't smoke e-cigarettes. So I'm trying to do that on a statewide basis. And, I know if counties get involved in that, that's very helpful because it kind of promotes it. I'm hoping that we can get something passed this year on that issue.
To tell us a little bit about e-cigarettes, because it was devised as a smoking cessation tool, right? But really, I mean, people still are taking in nicotine.
Right.
So it still is an implement by which you take in drugs.
Nicotine and other things that we're not really sure about,
Right.
all the other things. And there have been instances where they've exploded, caught on fire. So they really have to be evaluated as to what they are. But for many people, it may be a help. And, I don't want to deny that. But maybe at some point it will get a seal of approval like the nicotine patches and so on. But it isn't there yet. But the problem is really, I think, more the young people who just think, we were talking the other day, it used to be a while ago that you have these little cigarettes in a box and they were candy. All right. It's kind of like, it's kind of like that with them just trying it out. And the difficulty is, once they get into that mode, it's very easy to start to pick up cigarettes. And if you don't smoke when you're younger, the chances of you starting up when older, you're not going to do that.
Right. No, I know that I have read that the younger that a person starts smoking, the more powerful the addiction is as well. And that probably has something to do with the developing brain and the neural pathways of addiction. And I know, for example, in my parents' generation, my father was a lifetime smoker, and he started smoking when he was 12. And when he told us that, and we were shocked, he said, everybody started smoking when they were 12. So as a culture, we've kind of evolved our habits away from and trying to protect our children from something that could potentially be a very lifelong.
We've really lowered the smoking rates. We really have.
And something that could have lifelong devastation for people.
Right,
so,
And you look at the healthcare costs when you start to add up all the people that have smoked. It's incredible. So the best thing to do is to do preventative, not have something that will entice kids later on to do this.
It's kind of diabolical to have these like fruit flavors and bubblegum flavors.
Because that's not for the adult that's trying to get rid of their addiction, I don't think. Bubblegum?
I don't know. I don't think you're going to go from smoking like an unfiltered Camel to the bubblegum e-cigarette exactly.
Right. So all I'm trying to do is just say wherever you can't smoke an e-cigarette without taking a position on whether they're good or bad.
Right, exactly. And again, adults should be it's not a question of exactly people's personal choices, but I do think that there's a long history, legislative history, positive legislative history of saying, hey, these devices or these products can't be marketed to children. I mean, that was the whole thing about Joe Camel, the cartoon character, or or the Alco Pops that look like something that is definitely marketed towards children.
Well, that's what they're doing with e-cigarettes.
Yeah.
And, they market actually in magazines. I think you're actually starting to see commercials because I don't think they're under the smoking,
Ban.
the issue
Yeah.
of the smoking ban. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, that's an interesting
it's
thing.
more problematic.
Yeah.
And you just, it's just, they always think of something, the next thing.
The next
It
thing, right,
really
right.
is to turn our life around and, make
Yeah.
us do things. But they're in a business to sell. And they're still
right.
selling nicotine with those, as you pointed
Right.
out, which is addictive.
Right.
So, it can't be all that good. But there's also the issue of trying to raise the smoking age. And, New York City this
Right.
last year passed legislation to raise it to 21 to purchase cigarettes. And we, throughout the state, have an 18-year-old
Right.
purchase.
Right.
And other counties have gone to 19.
Yeah,
and-
yeah. Well, I mentioned to you before we began the program that I am going to submit legislation to change the purchase age to 19. Again, not talk. I mean, I don't think people should smoke. I think it's a bad habit, and no good comes of it. But I think that one of the most compelling reasons to change the age to 19 for purchase is that it really does severely restrict the flow of cigarettes into high school. And, people are legally adults at 18, but we do have other restrictions. We know, for example, that drinking impacts teenagers in a different way than it impacts adults, and therefore, for many, many, many reasons, many years ago, when I was 20, as a matter of fact, the drinking age went to 21.
Right.
So, I don't think that is too, I don't think that that's too overbearing to say, we should try to, in whatever way we can, try to limit the amount of cigarettes that are available to our 18 and younger, frankly,
Right. Because that's where most of the kids, either get cigarettes from home,
Right.
whether their parents give it to them or not, underage, or whether they find them there. But most of them get it from their friends,
Yeah.
their older friends who have the ability, or your 18-year-olds, you can go out and buy cigarettes and you get it to your friends.
Yeah.
I was very proud of CVS.
Yes, it was a very
Right.
consistent marketing message, right? That
They're not going to
if
have
the-
cigarettes.
Yeah.
They're not going to sell. They're
Yeah.
a pharmacy. They sell
Right.
healthy things.
Right, and beyond even just being a pharmacy, they have a lot of health services that they're providing. I mean, more people get their flu shots in CVS's than other types of drugstores and get them in their doctor's office, for example. So they are trying to be something that does promote a healthy lifestyle. So that was a
Right.
very good move.
And I hope they're just the first of a
Yeah.
lot of these
Yeah.
big companies
Yeah.
that say, let's not do
Let's
this.
let's try to restrict that.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which would be
absolutely.
great.
So very good. So very good. So do you have any other legislative priorities that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, we have, there's going to be next year on the ballot. Actually, last year, we had 6 constitutional amendments
Yeah, some people
on
didn't
the
turn over
ballot.
the ballot, though.
Oh, well, if they didn't get into the 6
that's
constitutional amendments. There were 3 of them for the Adirondacks
Right,
and
right.
environment. But there was one casino gambling, which was the very hot one. It's also about retirement ages for judges.
Right.
So we went through 6 last year. So this year, we're going to have at least 2.
Right.
We may actually have a third item. The governor has proposed having a $2 billion referendum on getting technology into our schools.
But this would be the first year for that piece of legislation, so it wouldn't be on the
No,
ballot
no,
this year?
it's not a constitutional amendment.
see.
It's just
Okay,
a
okay.
spending referendum.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
so that may be on, and
Yeah.
we'd have to know a little bit more about whether it's setting up classrooms for more computers, and it does go to the equity issue
Right,
of
right.
making sure we have the right systems in place, and be able to actually part of it. He was talking about doing some capital for pre-kindergarten programs. You can't just all of a sudden start pre-kindergarten programs because you don't have room.
Right.
I mean, I've asked the superintendents in my school saying, okay, if you started a program, where are you going to be?
Right.
Where do you have
Well, I mean,
it?
the Austin School, I think, is a good example of that. They started out as a Head Start program, ran for many years, 15 years, 20 years as a Head Start program with limited enrollment, and then just started growing it
Right.
a little
And now
at
it's a
time.
part of the school.
And now it's not only is it a part of school, but it's universal. Anyone who
Right.
wants to sign up can sign up. But that didn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And, the city, I know the mayor, wants to do it overnight or over 2 nights.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that you can really do it. But that will be on the ballot. But there are 2 other ballot issues that I've been working on for a while. One is having an independent redistricting commission. And every 10 years, when the census is done, we have to look at our state. We divide our state up into 150 assembly districts, and they all have to be within 5% in population, up or down.
Right.
And then we have 63 Senate districts. They have to be divided up around the state. Same thing, 5% up or down. And then we have congressional districts, same thing. Nobody else, the governor, they all run statewide or U.S. senators, so we don't have to deal with them. But we have all these districts, and it becomes very political. And, each year it's usually the assembly, and that's headed by Democrats, decide what the districts are going to be, and then the Senate, headed by Republicans, decide what the districts will be. And, some districts are perfect, and they're not gerrymandered, but there's some that you could really classify as gerrymandered. So the issue that people will be voting on is whether to establish this independent redistricting commission, have it as part of the Constitution of the state of New York. There will be, a number of people that will be chosen to be on it. And determine the districts.
Yeah.
So, stay tuned to that one, because there'll be a lot more discussion about the specifics on it
And how it
and
happened.
how it will work.
Yeah.
But
Well,
generally, I think it's a good idea, because what's happening now is really not a good idea.
I mean, that's sort of what happened with the congressional districts, correct? I mean, like that they wound up choosing work of an outside agency.
They had to, because they couldn't
because
come
of
to
the
couldn't come to conclusion.
Yeah,
on it. Right.
yeah,
We were
so-
losing 2 last year. I think or 2 years ago, we were
Right.
losing 2 congressional districts, and couldn't figure. It was the politics that definitely got in the way
Right.
of all that.
Right.
So, but also on the ballot. Our Constitution it's only like 27 pages, but there's a lot of interesting things in it. And one of them is that in the legislature where I sit, all the bills have to be printed on our desks. Not, under our desks, we have this huge pile of paper. It grows and grows so much that if you move your foot, you kick the whole thing
It's
out.
an avalanche.
It's all strung together. It's really interesting to see. And you have the strings all tied together. You really can't get to it because it is tied together.
Right.
It's awesome. And now we've gotten to a point where we're printing 4 pages on a page,
Right.
and on both sides.
Right.
And you look at it and you can't read it
Right.
because it is so small. But the Constitution says we have to have it there. The
yeah.
only way to get rid of this paper that we don't need, because
Yeah.
actually, if I wanted to have a bill in paper, that I could get.
Right.
And I would tend to have my laptop, or
Right.
we'll have,
And you
I
could
don't know
print
what
it
we'll
out
have.
from
You can
the
just print it out,
website, yeah.
or you could just read it from there without
Yeah.
printing. We're in a different age.
Right.
And when they did, when they put together the Constitution in this particular clause, they never anticipated
Right.
computers.
Right. It was an unintended consequence, right? Because
Right.
things changed, and the idea was to give legislators the time and the ability to read legislation
right.
before they voted on it.
But
right.
actually, you could read it faster if you could read it on your computer, because
absolutely,
it takes so long to get
Right.
it printed.
Right.
Sometimes we were sitting there waiting for the print job to be done, and when it comes out, it's
Yeah.
hot paper, and and there's no way. Once it's not, on the computer, you can say, okay, I want to look up a health center.
Right.
I want to look up, open doors,
Right.
see what kind of funds went this way, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, domestic violence. I want to look these things up. You can't do that with this huge piece
of
of paper.
course,
It's
of course.
really hard to
Yeah,
find.
yeah.
You kind of, you go through it and you try your best, but it's
Right.
really hard. So that is going to be on the ballot.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very funny issue. Now, who's in favor? Who's not? I've heard that the computer people. I'm not going to name a name.
Right.
Are very excited about it because they
course, yeah.
figured that they can go out and bid on it and try to get us computers. Some of the paper industry is not so happy about it because we won't print on all this paper and throw it away.
What happens to that paper? I assume you
oh.
recycle it. You must
Well,
pulp it.
it must get recycled, but it goes into a big bin.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they come around our desk, not the stuff that's here, but
Right.
other stuff, and but at the end of session, if you're ever there at the end of our session, it all gets thrown out. It's recycled.
Yeah.
But it's such a waste.
It is a waste,
'cause
especially because you can't even use it.
You can't use it. It is
Right.
too small to read. You have to have a magnifying glass. So anyway, so that's going to be on the ballot.
Right.
I don't think there's anything else that's going to be there.
Well, you
but-
know, even something like that, it's going to require education because probably most people don't even understand why you would have. It's not intuitive to understand why you would have papers printed 4 up, 2 sides on string underneath your desk.
Right. Or they may say, well, then maybe they won't read it, but you can read it better.
Right.
I mean, you could always get it printed. If
Right.
I wanted, as a legislator, if I decided I wanted to still have paper under my desk, I could ask for it. But you don't have to mandate it on 150 assembly members and
Yeah.
63 senators.
Yeah.
But you know, I could, you know, I'm so much better reading it and getting it faster.
Well, even if you were someone who didn't, for whatever reason, didn't like to read on computers, you know, for whatever reason, you would still print it out 1 page at a time, so you could actually read it. Like you never use
or
that
you could
printed
go
version.
to the bill. We have
Right.
we have a bill room,
Right.
and you have all these bills that are there, and you could just go get a copy of
Right.
it. They would have, obviously they're going to have more limited copies because we'd be all computerized,
Right.
which is great for
is
the
good,
public
yeah,
too. So
yeah.
somebody could, you know, they'll have everything on the internet, which we eventually have anyway.
Which you do have, yeah.
But it
yeah.
takes a while.
Yeah.
So,
But not too long. I mean,
not
you
too
know,
long.
I track bills in New York State all the time.
So
Pretty
you have
much every
better
day.
you have better access to them than, in a sense, I do sitting in the chamber. So, but we will have
That's
to
funny.
talk about it because there will be savings. There'll be savings of all the paper. There'll be probably there'll be personnel savings too. You won't need as many printers. You know, we will have to get some kind of a laptop or something that we can use.
Do most members have laptops on the desk during the session?
Actually, most of them do.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah,
You go around. I started to. Well, I got into this issue a long time
Yeah.
ago, and then it just kept building. I walk around and see how many people had it. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
Everybody's got everything, you know, and they come in with several pieces of
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah.
And
Well, listen, the work world has changed. I mean, that's true
It
of every
has,
work
it
setting,
has,
you
yeah.
know. And
some people were concerned because it doesn't look historical if we're sitting there with that. But you know what? It is a changing world.
well, history evolves. It will look historical in 15 years when the systems are all different, and that'll be the way things were back in 2013.
Right. We try to put the legislation together to allow anything to happen, any kind of
Right.
change, and you know,
Yeah.
maybe we will be okay.
Yeah,
Maybe we
yeah.
won't.
Yeah, no, I remember a piece of legislation that you worked on many years ago when I worked for you. For those of viewers who don't know, I worked for Assemblywoman Gala for
My
7
chief of
years,
staff, yeah.
and learned quite a lot from her. Thank you very much. And that you worked on about a specific delivery mechanism that was written into a law for the tax receiver's office, and how that specific delivery mechanism was archaic at that time.
Right.
So
Well, we were saying that with taxes, everybody had to send something back. I think that was the one, sending back to the state in an envelope, written in an envelope. And then I asked the state tax and finance department, what do you do with those envelopes?
right.
The answer wasn't really particularly good. They were sitting there because they didn't have time to go through it. So we said, okay, why don't we make it optional so people can just send it by email or whatever else? So, you know, we've had to do a lot of that, you know, slowly but surely.
Yeah.
But
Well, it goes back to that old idea of government being a little bit slow on in change, which is not a bad thing. You know, especially in government functioning, you want to be very, very careful with changes that you make. But on the other hand, too, sometimes it doesn't make sense in the real world.
Right,
you know?
right. No, it is. And you have
Yeah.
to go back over. I know the county has gone back over your charter. There was a commission to look at the charter.
Yeah.
And just like, well, we kind of do it piecemeal in the
Right.
state with the constitutional amendment because when we had on the ballot, every 20 years on the ballot, so in 1997, there was a proposal to have a state constitutional convention that would have looked over all of these issues, you know, like,
Right.
well, they would have probably come up with the redistricting, the independent redistricting commission. They probably would have come up with my idea, you know, with the paper. We also, in between, I got the bill passed to have the Constitution include women instead
Right.
of all
Gender
men.
neutral, that was very
And
exciting.
yeah, gender neutral legislation. So they would have come up with all this, but we would come up with a lot of other
Yeah.
ones for change. But the public said no, that they didn't want us to have it. And there were various reasons. I think at that point, the League of Women Voters, who is very well respected as a group, had been very concerned that legislators could be delegates to the convention. And we shouldn't be, because we can do this any day of the week. We can change it, offer a constitutional change. So it should be more of a public kind of thing. They're right, but you can't change it without having a convention. You're kind of like stuck. So they said, people said no. So in 2017, it'll be on the ballot again. And whether people will say, well, let's do a convention now and reevaluate everything that's in our Constitution.
Does the legislature set who will be the delegates?
No, it doesn't preclude elected officials.
No, I'm saying how does it get set who will be delegates? You could set rules that say.
There are elections.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's election. People run as a delegate. The problem that they said was that, if I were to run as a delegate in my
People
district,
would vote for you,
they might tend to vote for somebody that they knew versus somebody else.
Right.
So, but there's so many wonderful people out there that could be delegates. And if we could just preclude elected officials from running, but you can't, because it doesn't say. Well, we weren't going to preclude county people, but at least, it's a state constitution.
I'm just saying, people who run for office, Sandy. That's what we do.
I guess that's true. So we'll have to see what happens again by the time. But there is a group in the city. I actually went to a conference last fall. There's a group in the city that's trying to get prepared for this constitutional convention and start to think about some of the issues that might be brought up, so that maybe when we go out for the public for a vote, there could be like a laundry list of some of the things that might need to be changed.
Yeah.
I mean, people worry about change. It's back to the whole issue.
Yeah,
people worry about change. They fought for a long time to get this in the Constitution, the state Constitution.
And now they're worried.
And they're worried that maybe it
Yeah.
wouldn't be in there afterwards. But
you do have to have some faith in the process, which I guess people don't have at this particular
well,
point.
just picking a lieutenant governor. When you lose a governor, how do you get a lieutenant governor? And that's kind of what's the best process that we should have. And we've gone through this a couple of times. So I think we really need to establish a good process. But nothing will happen in our houses because the Senate wants to pick the lieutenant governor and the Assembly wants to pick the lieutenant governor, and probably the governor wants to pick the lieutenant governor.
I would think that would be a fair bet.
I think we are at a standstill. So actually,
enter
with
the
Governor,
judiciary.
actually, with Governor Patterson, he did pick the lieutenant governor with approval of the Senate. So, but there was a whole issue going on then in the courts about that. So.
So speaking of hot button issues, what do you think the chances are for any kind of campaign finance reform to come before the legislature?
Well, I think there's a lot of support for it, and there's a lot of non-support for it. So you really have diversity of opinion on some public financing.
Well, there did seem to be some movement last year, but then it kind of fizzled out.
There
at the
was,
end.
and the governor tried very hard to get it in last year as a separate kind of standalone bill. The Assembly passed some public financing. The Senate wasn't interested in it last year. This year, it's actually in the state budget at the moment, whether it stays in the state budget or not. The governor put a lot of different proposals in the budget, I guess, to see what would happen. And so I don't know what's going to happen. It is a budgetary thing because it wouldn't start right away. So it would slowly work itself in. It wouldn't be for elected positions this year. It would be in the future. So,
well, it's another thing that you need to ramp up, definitely. With the processes and everything.
I just think, people don't. I think a lot of people don't understand what's happening now. Is that people that have a lot of money are getting their way on laws and bills, and things are going in their direction against what's really sometimes the public value and the public need.
Well, and I think, too, it really puts people who run for office in a bind, because if you're not independently wealthy and you can't self-finance your campaigns, you do have to spend time raising money. There's just no two ways about it. So if there was a measure of if there was another mechanism by which you could raise a smaller amount of money and then be matched, it would encourage more people to be involved in the electoral process.
Well, they actually say in New York City, where they have public financing campaigns, there are more people involved in campaigns giving small contributions, and there are more people voting.
Right.
And more people voting is the end of the day.
Is always good.
Right.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I remember you telling me this, my very first campaign back in 2004, even if someone gives you $5, they've made an investment in you, and that is really true.
It is true. Right. And they'll tell their friends and neighbors.
Yeah.
So it's really good to have a lot of small donations. It's not good when they're $10,000 or $2,500 or $100,000. It's not good.
Although I'm on the other side too, that I have been elected the majority leader for this legislative session, and there are fundraising responsibilities associated with that. So, I kind of see both sides of it. That if an organization wants to forward, if a political organization like the Democratic majority of the County Board of Legislators wants to make sure that the issues that are important to us and we feel are the best service to the people of Westchester are able to be brought to the fore, that that requires some money. Campaigns require money. It costs money to communicate with people. So what's you
and usually you say, but if somebody's giving a lot of money, are they just doing it out of the goodness of their heart?
Right. Well, no, I think that when people give you money, again, they've made an investment in you. If they've made a $10,000 investment in you, they're going to expect,
something in return.
Something in return.
Right.
Whether or not they get it is a different story. I mean, I believe that most elected officials, try to do use their best judgment and do what they believe. But I do think that money is a very pervasive influencer in politics.
Well, I have to tell you, back to the smoking issue.
Yeah.
I mean, there are statistics now that they really contributed huge amounts of money recently on the smoking issue.
Yeah.
And I think it's because comes to the fold. So does that convince people one way or another? I don't know, but it's a lot of money that's been put into the coffers that way.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because of course, it does go back to obviously protected First Amendment rights for political free speech. And of course now there's been this little confusing of what exactly political free speech is, and whether or not the contribution of money, classifies. That's something we probably have to take up at a federal level about, all this money flowing into issue-based campaigns, and whether or not that should be something that has a little bit more transparency.
And that's troubling because it's not transparent. You really don't know who's done the ad.
Right. And who seeks to benefit. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot going on at
it's
all
very
the
exciting
levels.
up there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you had to pick what you hoped the most for this legislative session at the end of June, what do you want to be celebrating the first weekend in July?
Oh, that's really a hard one, Catherine. I don't know. I think I'm real property taxed here, so a lot of these issues dealing with taxes are really important to me, and I just feel like it's important to New Yorkers. So I'm hoping at the end of the day, we have a lot of those good programs. And the circuit breaker, I think I can just see the people who would really, really be helped by that. In addition to that, I have this crazy issue with universal life ministers. We're not really sure that they're legal in the state of New York, and people use them. So, I have a lot of things that I work on that we'll continue to work on and try to make some changes that way.
Yeah, terrific. Well, here's hoping it'll be a very productive year for you. Thank you very, very much for all you do for the people of the 95th Assembly District, including myself and my family and all of my friends who live here. And, we really to be congratulated, Sandy, and I don't say this lightly, that you are a person who really takes on issues in such a fair and complete and competent way. And, I'm really delighted that you represent me in Albany, because I know that we're being very, very, very well served
Catherine,
by
you. Didn't need to say that. Thank you very much.
Well, of course I didn't need to say it, but
know,
I'm saying it anyway.
Well, I think that is a ditto for you, too. So,
well, thank you, Sandy.
Right.
All right. Well, that concludes this episode of Hudson Valley News and Views, and join us again next time. Thanks very much.